Does everything need a reason? When I was fresh out of Yeshiva, 19 years old, I thought I had the answers to everything. I thought I could save the Jewish world. I thought I could explain all the deep meanings behind all of our traditions, using our great treasure house of Jewish texts. What was Shabbat really about? How to look forward to the festivals? Why we still miss the temple? I was passionate and I was convinced that everything in Judaism had a good reason. And given the chance, I could help people to believe, and I could help people to keep, to observe. You see, I saw Judaism as eminently sensible and very reasonable. And I think I'm now known as a person who teaches Jewish texts in that way. And that's what I do at the London School of Jewish Studies. We're based around text teaching and bringing it to life and making it meaningful for people. In my teaching, what I'm always looking for is what I call a killer text. What's a killer text? A killer text is one that wins people over. It's just so good. It's got impeccable credentials, who said it, when it was written. It's clear, punchy, relevant, and straight to the point. I'll give you an example I found recently to help explain. It's in a midrash from Bereshit Rabbah, which goes back at least 1,500 years, and it's based on a verse in Psalms, Psalm 18. The verse says, Hakel tamim darko imrat Hashem tzufa. Hakel tamim darko, God's way is perfect. Imrat Hashem tzufa, God's word is refined. Tzaruf is refined, smooth. What does the midrash say? And this is an incredible one. The commandments, and this is said in the name of Rav, a famous Amorah of Talmudic era. The commandments were only given so that a person can become refined by them. For what does God really care whether someone shechs an animal at the throat or the nape of the neck? Rather, the purpose of the commandments is to refine humanity. That's brilliant. That's quite a shocker. It doesn't really matter to God exactly how you shecht. So the whole issue of kashrut is only for us, to refine us, but it doesn't matter to God. I mean, in modern Hebrew, when you say, what do I care? You say, ma ichpat li. And the phrase in the Midrash is, ma ichpat la Hashem. What does it matter to God? It's the mitzvot that refine us, that refine our senses. We need to be careful how we cut the animal to make us more sensitive and aware. But the specifics, incredibly, don't really matter to God. Now, this is a killer text because it explains brilliantly a lot of intricacies of Judaism, brilliantly in one line. It's over 1,500 years old, impeccable source, and from Rav. And I love texts like this. They really help explain. And I'd say I've built my career on finding sources like these, which are intelligible and reasonable and make people enjoy Judaism. But at the same time, I've come to see that not everything has or even needs a reason. Let me tell you why. You see, back in Yeshiva, all those years ago, something else happened to me. But that was more of what I'd say is a slow burner. I had a very special teacher, Rabbi Yehoshua Engelman. And he said to me at the end of my year, he said, Rafi, may your 120 years on earth be not just of mind, but of heart too. And he gave me a book to read. I only had it for a week, so I'd get on a bus, because I'd read this article that if you read things in different places, then you'll remember it by the places that you were. So I took this book, and I got on a bus with a Kartisia, and I got off at a stop, read a chapter. It was a bit crazy. And I got off at another stop and read another chapter, and so on, until I'd finished the book. It kind of worked when I visited again. Occasionally, when I visited that same place, the stories came into my head. But it was just a way of finishing the book. What was the book? Souls on Fire by Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize-winning Holocaust survivor. A brilliant book about the Hasidic masters and the era of Hasidic Judaism. And that book, I must admit, changed my life. The opening of the book says as follows. Wiesel says, my father, an enlightened spirit, believed in man. My grandfather, a fervent Chassid, believed in God. One taught me to speak, one taught me to sing, and both whispered to me from beyond the storm. You see, the Hasidim weren't so into finding reasons for things. They were in love with God and in love with life. And one of my favorite stories in the book, actually in the sequel, Somewhere Master, but I had a 2-volume edition, really summarized this and will help me explain what I mean by does everything need a reason? And it's about the Karliner Hasidim, the Hasidim of Rav Aaron of Karlin. And it's a wonderful story that Wiesel tells, and I'll tell it you now. Wiesel says, when 2 Karliner Hasidim meet, what should they do? Well, they should be learned and they should study Hasidic Kabbalah and share their latest insights and ideas from the Kabbalistic world. But if they don't know Kabbalah, then they should study Talmud together and bring out new ideas that they've learned from their teachers or passed along from their teacher Rav Aaron of Karlin. But if they don't know so much and they find it hard to teach Talmud, then the Karliner Hasidim, when they meet, should learn Torah and talk about the Seder that just happened. But if they don't even know Torah, can you imagine 2 Karliner Hasidim that don't know Torah, but just say they didn't? Then they should tell each other Hasidic stories or sing to each other Hasidic songs. But if even they'd forgotten those, if for some reason they weren't able to remember stories or sing songs, then what should 2 Karliner Hasidim do when they meet each other? Well, Wiesel says, they should just love each other. That, Wiesel then says after, is in one line a summary of all of Chassidut, demanding and challenging the most from a Jew, but accepting whatever you can give. But for me, little me out of yeshiva, head in the clouds, it taught me something else. That even after, or even before the great Kabbalistic readings or the Talmud, or Hasidic stories, at the base of every relationship, at the base of every learning, is an understanding and love for one person to another. That deeper than intellectual pursuits was a human relationship. And if my heart was open to someone else, then I'd find reasons for what I was doing. But if it wasn't, and I wasn't connected, then reasons would never help. I used to believe it was the text I taught that made all the difference. But it might be my relationship to the text that matters. Maybe it's my love for the text that makes people want to listen to me just as much or even more than the texts themselves. Maybe it's my love for the text that makes it a killer text. There's a classic division in the commandments, the mitzvot of Judaism. You may have heard of it. They are often divided on a simple level into 2 categories, chukim, or a chok, and mishpatim, or a mishpat. Mishpatim are laws that make sense, that are reasonable, whereas chukim are seen as statutes. They just are. We don't understand them. So, for instance, murder would be a mishpat. We understand why it is wrong to murder or to kill. Whereas shaknez, the rule of not wearing clothes of wool and linen together, is a chok. It has no reason. It's not intelligible. Now, we humans, created in the image of God, have a sense of natural morality. And so the Gemara says, in the name of Rav Yochanan, all about mishpatim, he says the following: had the Torah not been given, we would have learnt modesty from the cat, theft from the ant, chastity from the dove, and sexual relationships from the fowl, which would make some very interesting YouTube videos. But the point that the Talmud is saying is, we could have worked out all the mishpatim ourselves. If they're logical and sensible and about moral societies, then we'd work them out. And indeed, many societies, most all human civilizations, have a system of moral values, and they overlap very much. Another midrash says, those laws in the Torah, which are mishpatim, and the Rav says this in a midrash, says, had they not been written, it would have been proper to write them for ourselves. For example, theft, forbidden relations, murder, and so on. But chukim, a chok, is not rational. We wouldn't have come up with it if it wasn't revealed to us. We never would have thought to shakness. The other classic chok is called the para aduma, the red heifer, which opened our sedra yesterday of chukat. In fact, it's the quintessential chok. Zot chukat haTorah, the sedra begins. This is the statute of the Torah. What's it about? It's about purification from death. Its ashes are burnt, the red heifer is burnt, and the ashes are used to purify somebody from contact with the dead. But ironically or weirdly, the Kohen that does that, himself becomes impure through the process. Why? What a crazy kind of law. Why a red heifer? Why had hyssop? Why, if the priest gets involved, then the person who does it too becomes pure again, but he becomes impure? I mean, it's crazy. Even the Board of Deputies wouldn't have come up with a crazy law like that. But are the chukim and mishpatim, the reasonable and the statutes, fixed? If a chok can be explained, does it become a mishpat? In my desire to explain everything and give a reason to everything as I grew up, I wanted to understand chukim too. And why not? There's a wonderful verse in Psalms that I saw quoted by Dr. Diane Grunfeld, a previous Dayan of the London Bet Din. He was a doctor and a Dayan. You don't see that a lot today. What did it say? He quoted a verse from Psalms that proved that you should be trying to understand the chukim, these statutes. What was the verse from Psalm 119? V'chok me'resha'im Yeshua, ki chokecha lo darashu. V'chok me'resha'im Yeshua, salvation, being saved, is far away from the wicked. Why? Ki chokecha, because your chukim, your statutes, God, lo darashu, you don't try and understand. This, Dan Grunfeld says, is a clear verse, a proof. You should try and make sense of chukim. And if you do, they become mishpatim. One person's chok is another person's mishpat. And in fact, there's one man who, according to the Midrash, endeavored to find the reason for every chok. My hero. Explain everything. Who was it? It was King Solomon. But they say that he understood every chok. He could explain it all, except for one. One niggling mitzvah he couldn't understand. And what was it? It was the para aduma, the red heifer. Why? Why was that so unintelligible? Why can't it make sense? If you look at the Sedra, if you look back yesterday, Rashi explains para aduma, explains the laws, and at the end and says no one can understand it. But if you look carefully at the end of his explanation, even he throws in an explanation. And people over years have always tried to, rituals and death and so on. So why could King Solomon not understand it? Why is it beyond? Well, my other teacher, Rav Mattis Weinberg, taught me what para aduma is all about. And it relates directly to the issue that I'm just expressing with you now, which is, does everything need a reason? You see, Rav Mattis explained to me what it was about. He said, King Solomon couldn't work out para aduma, the red heifer, not because the ritual was incomprehensible, but because the issue the ritual addressed was incomprehensible. What do I mean? Mortality, death. Death itself is what limits our ability to understand everything. Our mortality limits our understanding, because no matter how smart you are, death gets you in the end. You're limited by your finite time on this earth. That's what it means that he couldn't get beyond the para aduma. He couldn't get beyond the fact that he was a human being. Last week, I'll throw this in because it fascinates me, I saw an amazing, mad English opera, Dr. Dee, by Damon Albarn, inspired by Alan Moore, about the life of this crazy Renaissance man who knew alchemy and physics and philosophy, and his thirst for knowledge was insatiable in the 15th century. Queen Elizabeth I asked him when she should choose the date of her coronation to be in line with the stars and the planets to have the most impact. And he was an incredible man, a genius. He tried to uncover the language of heaven itself, but in the end went mad, and his limitations and death got him. It's the same story. I recommend you go and see it. It's pretty wacky. The point I'm making, though, is that death, therefore, is the ultimate chok. Death is what limits our understanding. Mortality limits you. And that is why para aduma is the ultimate chok. But if you think about it, our own mortality, the fact that we are limited, gives us our humanity, because we have finite time to make a difference on this earth. And our limitedness also teaches us our humility, because we can't do everything. We have to make priorities and choices. So in fact, our limitedness, our mortality, makes us want to preserve life, makes us find meaning in the world. So it's not that chukim are not unreasonable, but they teach us the limits of reason, which is the point I was realizing always. Does everything need a reason? Well, some things are beyond reason, and that gives us meaning in our lives. In fact, it gives us reason. In other words, Everything doesn't have a reason because life is too short. To finish, I want to make one final distinction which will help explain what I've been talking about. I've told you that I love Jewish texts, but until a few years ago, I never called them text. In Yeshiva, I was always taught to use the word makorot, which means sources, makor, the source of something. Only when I stepped out to the yeshiva world did makorot become texts, or in modern Hebrew, textim, which is what they call them. Levot b'textim. And I've come to realize, a big difference between textim and makorot, between texts and sources. You see, texts are disemboweled words and phrases that are shorn of their foundation. They stand alone, atomized, like modern human beings. They must be reasonable because they stand by on their own merit. You don't know where they come from. They're just shown out to you, and you hear them and think, do they mean something to me? They can be intellectually challenged or even rejected, but they stand on their own. But makorot, sources, by definition, are different. They're grounded. They spring from our tradition. We know where they come from. They're part of a particular setting and a particular history, a particular people and a particular culture. And I study them because they're mine, because I spring from them. And so they don't always need a reason because I'm bound to them nevertheless through my relationship. If I read the words of the Torah, the words of our rabbis, as texts, then they would always need reasons. But if I read them as makorot, as sources, then just like those two Kalina Hasidim, I can just love them. And if they're difficult, then like difficult family members, I still have to engage with them. Does everything need a reason? No, I don't think so. But everything needs to have its source. Everyone needs to find their source. That's what I think. Thank you.